Hello, and welcome to another edition of Cultural Conversations with the Big South. I'm your host, Darius Thigpen. We have a guest this month who doesn't really need any introduction for college basketball fans. He's been a head coach in college for over 30 years, guided 5 different programs to the NCAA tournament. He's coached with the U.S. men's national team, won conference or national coach of the year in 7 different seasons, and of course, he won the 1998 national championship with the University of Kentucky. He is Tubby Smith. Coach, how are you doing this
Thank you.
evening?
Thank you for the introduction. Glad to be here. Right.
Yes, sir. An absolute pleasure to have you on. As we're looking forward to a conversation to really get some insights into leadership, into your style as a coach, as a leader. But let's start with something a little bit more lighthearted. Coach, I've got to ask you, one of the first stories that I came across when doing my research for you is the history of your nickname, Tubby. Now, your given name is Orlando, and I know you've tried to shake the moniker Tubby a couple different times. So, if you don't mind, how did you get the nickname Tubby?
Well, let me give you my version and the version that we've shared with people. And that is, when I was growing up with 16 other siblings, you didn't have indoor plumbing. We didn't have indoor plumbing. So we had to wash during the week, but you actually took a bath on Saturday night. And that's when you're able to get in the tub. And when it was my turn to get in the tub, I didn't want to get out. And that's the story I tell. But my mom, she says I was a little chubby when I was a kid. So she, God rest her soul, she's no longer with us. So we stuck with the tub, being part of the reason I got the name Tubby. But that's true though. That's Tubby. You better get out of that tub. That's it.
Yes, sir. And then when you entered high school, you had a teacher who wasn't really accommodating with the nickname, should I say?
Well, she was, I guess you would call old school and very professional in that, when you have an attendance log. And so when she was calling names, she might say, if she says Steve Benjamin, you would say, I want to be called Steve. When she get to May Helen, you may say May Helen May. And she just check up. She wouldn't even look up. And when they got to my name, she said Orlando Henry, which is my real name. And somebody blurted out Tubby. And she didn't say, she didn't look up. She just said Orlando or Henry. And so, Tubby. And so she said, she looked up over her glasses, young man, we don't use nicknames here. We use given names. And what's your Orlando? But by this time, people were snickering in the classroom, and we were it was my first year at Great Mills High School, leaving the all black school, going to Great Mills High School, which was a predominant white school, and integration just take so hence the name Tubby stuck with me.
Well, the name Tubby stuck with you, and Coach, it stuck with you through a life that's seen you use basketball to elevate you to leadership, to a platform where you really have a voice, where you speak and people listen. As you're preparing for year 4 at your alma mater, High Point, I imagine this is almost kind of like year 3, almost because last season was so different than what things had normally been because of COVID-19. The impact on the U.S. started just after the off season started a couple of years ago. So now that you've had last season under your belt, when you look back, how did you all weather so many different conditions swirling around COVID last year?
It was tough, and you can see it in players and people today. I know, just looking at our team, we have 3 freshmen on our team, and I can tell that they're not used to the intensity level because they really didn't play a lot of games last year. And even with our players, we missed quite a few games with contact tracing guys that had COVID. We had one player miss 42 days, another was 48 days. We had 4 games schedules changed because of COVID. Uh, I just think the emotional and the psychological stress that it put everyone under um, has led to a different approach to um, how we coach, how we teach, how we lead.
Well, coach, it's one of those things where if you yourself hasn't haven't dealt with it, everyone, it feels like at this point, knows someone or knows of someone who has been affected by COVID-19. Well, you yourself personally,
Yes.
you've had to deal with this as a coach and off the court as well, right?
Yes, I had COVID, was out for a while, and we had to shut down the program. But looking back on it, I remember the day it happened. I was overseeing. Uh, I was at a nursing home, seeing my former college coach Jerry Steele over in Greensboro, North Carolina, the very day that Syracuse was practicing here at our gym at High Point University, and they were supposed to play North Carolina that night. And I remember leaving the nursing home, which was one of the worst hit places. They were affected harder than anyone. A lot of people passed away. Thank God, Coach Steele, he lasted until this summer. But it's to see that happen in real time, where Coach Boeheim, Jim Boeheim, was here, and they were going to play North Carolina that night, and it was as they were walking on the court, it was canceled, and watching games canceled around the country, whether it was in college or professional, was really eerie feeling. But and we're still battling it. I hope everyone understands and appreciates that we've lost a lot of good people to this dreaded pandemic.
You referenced having to deal with it last year, and even kind of looking ahead to this year, understanding, of course, that we still have guides in place, we still have protocol to follow. But when you look to this season, do you think that this upcoming year will be a little bit more back on track, or are you still prepared for this to be a season where you may have those kinds of interruptions that happen?
I'm concerned, and we're trying to prepare for that. Just like I mentioned, a few of our players, a couple haven't been vaccinated, and they're going to be, like I told them, we're playing a very competitive schedule against some Power Five schools that may not allow their players or their team to compete. Because I remember we were having to test at a certain level to play teams in the Power Five conferences. So every state, every lot of locales have different uh, mandates, protocol for testing. So I'm still concerned, like here in Guilford County in North Carolina, where well, a little more stringent on mask wearing. We're still having to wear masks indoors. There are going to be different standards at different universities in different states that we travel. So I am still concerned. I was impressed that we got through last year with the Final Four, and but in talking to some of the coaches and players that had to go through just being almost housed and not being able to leave the hotel for 2 and 3 weeks. I mean, but it was well worth it to Baylor and some other the teams that were in the Final Four.
Well, looking at last year and 2020 in general, if the pandemic wasn't enough of a challenge to deal with last year, we look back at that spring and that summer now, and we think this is going to be a time that will forever be known for America being asked the question of how its black citizens are treated surrounding the murder of George Floyd, and really looking at it as an inflection point. So, coach, as a
Mhm.
black man, as a father of black men, as a leader of black men, how did you handle all of the conversations that would have popped up around the death of George Floyd and the topic of being black in America with all of the people who look up to you? How did you handle those conversations last year?
Well, like I would any other time, because that's part of our DNA. By that I mean that's part of being black. Just to be honest with you, that those are the things that you're concerned about. I raised, three sons and a daughter, so I'm thinking to myself how concerned we were whenever they would leave home, not and because they were black, whether they were being, um, but personally, and my players told me this when we were Zooming because we couldn't meet the summer before, not last summer, but the summer before this pandemic hit. And they were saying, Coach, you always, you don't realize it, but you always talk about how we should act. And when we're out in public, or even if you've been, stopped by a policeman, black or white policeman, the respect that you need to have for authority. That's number one. And I think what happened with George Floyd, and players were on Zoom. They go, Coach, even if you do that, what do you? I said, well, listen, you want to be able to survive it, and that's you don't have to be when a policeman stops you, comes to your window, or you're confronted with that. Just be respectful because they have a job to do, and you just want to get out of that situation the best way you can. So just do what you're told. And I equate it to coaching. I used to say, when we're coaching, I don't really ask you guys to run back on defense. I don't ask you to block out. I'm telling you. And so there's some days I come in here, I may be more um, animated about doing it, and I might be having a bad day. So so this issue about racism has been around forever. I grew up in a generation where where I was exposed and saw colored and white water fountains, colored bathrooms and white bathrooms. It's so you are concerned, especially being an African American black male, that things can easily get out. You can be misidentified. It can be so. My whole issue is know your surroundings, understand that you're trying to live another day, and it doesn't cost you a thing to be polite. It can take you a long way, even if it's now the George Floyd situation. I coach at Hope County, Rayford, North Carolina, where George Floyd's family is from, and here in North Carolina, we're outside of Fayetteville, and also know exactly where he was killed in Minnesota because I worked at the University of Minnesota for 6 years. So it really hit home, and I think that was one of the ways that I was able to communicate um, and convey to our players um, why it's important that you number one, obey the laws. If you do something, just make sure that you understand that these folks that there's good and bad in everyone, and sometimes you have to be conscious of that. Uh, and being African American, being black, you have to be even more uh, concerned and aware of it.
Now, Coach, I understand like your perspective on things. It's informed kind of twofold from different places you've been across, whether it's been in the South and in Georgia, Kentucky, Tulsa, North Carolina, and now also with Minnesota being kind of tied in through George Floyd. But then also you've got the perspective of living history in a way where people say maybe closer to my age haven't. I can't really remember what happened around Rodney King or even anything that happened before that. I'm much more connected to, say, cases like Trayvon Martin or Breonna Taylor in the last
Yeah.
decade or so. But when you take a look across your years as a coach and just in life in general, when you look at all these different cases and then with George Floyd in 2020, do you look at this as perhaps a different time coming from George Floyd? Do you look at it as something that's kind of more of the same, or do you look at it as like a difference to come
Well,
from the George Floyd from that last year?
I hear you. So I've been stopped before, and I know that I come from a point of it's not a situation where you're um, being less of a man if you don't, we all have to abide by rules and regulations and guidelines. you ask that question, I look back at the Rodney King situation and others that have, other incidents that have, the biggest thing now is the social media
Hmm.
and the cell phones. Things are being recorded and being seen, but it's pretty obvious that things were done and kind of swept under the rug. But now it's come to light, and it's something that America is having to deal with, and that we're all faced with this moment in time. That and you can see it even in athletics, how it's with emails and other things that are happening just in the last few days of how how people are being, and that points to that under people say, well, racism is no longer in existence. But if you thinking that way, or if you're talking that way, or you're emailing that way, or you're uh, then you have a problem, and so you have to change hearts, not just and that's hard to do. Hearts and minds, and that's a and that's a, we've been good Lord, we've got a lot of people trying to do that. So and that's going to take more time.
Sir.
And I think the conversations that are being had at this time are critical and important about racism.
That's fantastic advice, sir. Let's lighten things up a little bit. Looking at you back at High Point, return to your alma mater. It really was a celebration a couple of years ago when you rejoined High Point. It's a little bit different than some of the higher profile schools where you've coached, like Minnesota, Memphis, Texas Tech, Kentucky, of course. But how much have you embraced the challenge of putting High Point on the map, so to speak, of bringing a little extra visibility and success to your alma mater?
Well, I got to give it to our president, Dr. Nito Quabain, is a real visionary, and he's a sought after speaker. He's sought after by many other presidents at universities around the country to figure out how are we growing this university. Uh, we're now at, we have the largest freshman class for the last, I guess, 8 to 10 years. Every year, it's he's been here for 17 years, and we went from a 60, 90 acre school to a 600-acre school or more. So we really uh, built a new arena with a hotel attached to it and a convention center attached to it on campus, which we may be the only school in the country that has that. And it's a beautiful $170 million building that we're excited about being. And that's one of the reasons that we came here, because of Nito Quabain's vision and his extraordinary um, gift for entrepreneurship and salesmanship. And so both my wife and I went to school at High Point. So we've always given back. And so that's why I encourage our players and other people to give and serve. So to come back here and help them get this facility built and be a part of the growth and extraordinary changes that are taking place here in High Point was a no-brainer for me. And I was number one, I was out of a job. So I wasn't necessarily looking for a job, to be honest with you. But I had invested in this university. I've been invested in it since the day I came here in 1969. So it's a real honor and privilege to be back here leading this basketball program. Need to win some games,
Yes,
but I think we're on the right path.
but how about speaking about your home court? When we look at it, I mean, even before you were the coach, that's sort of the house that Tubby built. You had
Yeah.
a big role to play within the new arena, sir. So how does it feel to kind of have that also extra ownership, I guess you could say, over the
That's a
program in that way?
that's a good way to put it, because we need to take uh, ownership of things. And when you've invested both financially and otherwise. It's a unique, I guess, relationship that that you have with your alma mater. You know, I've done this before. I coached at my alma mater at Great Mills High School, so I've had some experience in how this works. But I'm back near people that I went to school with. Some of my former teammates are still in the area that we stay in touch with. Even professors and Dr. Cobain and I went to school together here. So I'm in a familiar area. We only lived here while I was going to school here getting my degree, but we've always come back, I think, every year in some form or fashion to High Point. And being the furniture capital, we everywhere we've ever been, we've bought our furniture and had it shipped, whether it was in Lubbock, Texas, or Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Lexington, Kentucky. So it's a beautiful area, beautiful region to live in. We have access to an airport. So you asked me about the court being named for me is I don't really. That's it's just the and you always want to leave a legacy, and that's the two. Like I remember my mom and dad when they said, "Boy, all you have is your name, and what you did between the time you're born, that little dash or hash between when you're born and when you die. That's who you are. And so, what kind of legacy do you want to leave? And so we try to give back.
That's fantastic, Coach. Coach, before we wrap up, I do think we would be remiss not to mention the loss of a Big South alum, a High Point basketball family member recently, Hasheen McIntyre, who died tragically just over a month ago at the age of 27. Coach, how's the team and the program dealt with the loss of Hasheen, and just how have you guys been able to kind of help out and encourage his family in this tough time?
Well, in this tough time, it's whenever something of this and gun violence is something we got to find a way to get control of this, and because there's so many young people, especially blacks, unnecessarily violence. Just um, but Hasheen was a young man I had met before. He didn't play for me. Played for Coach Cherry, but one of our assistant coaches, Eric Gabriel, went to his funeral, and we were involved in doing the things we felt to support his mom and his family. Um, and so it's just a tragedy, and we're going to find a way to honor him during the season as well, along with Gene Littles, who was another. He died of, of cancer recently in the last few weeks. So we've had the loss of Coach Jerry Steele pass away, but these are gentlemen. But Hashim's loss was whenever it's happened that way and at such a young age and such a bright future ahead of him is tough to handle. And so our university has been mourning his death for some time now.
Well, Coach, I know you all are going to do everything that you can in your power this season to honor Hasheen. And Coach, we know that you also have quite a few things that you worked on from a charitable side, and really looking at the work you've done in Lexington, everywhere you've been through the Tubby Smith Foundation. You've also been charitable in High Point. But one thing that I also wanted to highlight before we wrapped up, you also have High Point as a part of the upcoming No Room for Racism Classic coming this fall. What can you tell us about the Classic?
Well, it's we're playing against South Carolina State, which and I like the approach that the people at Rock Hill, South Carolina, the group called the Friendship Nines that were in 1961 that were arrested um, on the sit-in. You had the sit-in here. Most people remembered one in Greensboro or the Bloomington 10, but North Carolina was one of the places where black colleges, black students were at the forefront of the civil rights movement and the changes that were taking place. So to be a part of this and have Florida State, Leonard Hamilton, who's a legend in it, Frank Martin from South Carolina, Tony Madlock from South Carolina State, and they added other schools, which I think is critical. But we're happy to be representing High Point University in the Big South. I think Winthrop's in it also, so it'll be an exciting time to come together to keep no room for racism, keep that at the forefront. That there have been a lot of changes, but there's still a lot left to do to fight racism.
Yes, sir.
But there's a lot of talented people there, a lot of talented players. So we're excited about the opportunity to face South Carolina State Bulldogs. They gave us all we wanted years ago when I was a coach at Kentucky. When we won the national championship, we had to play South Carolina State, and they almost beat us, almost upset us.
Well, Coach, hopefully you guys have a little better luck this time around. Don't have to worry about
Well,
fighting
we
them
got them,
too hard.
yeah, but I know I'm not at Kentucky right now, so we got to be ready to play.
All right, we'll certainly be looking out for the No Room for Racism classic upcoming. Viewers also want to remind you a shout out that I like to do at the end of these for the Black Play-by-Play Scholarship and Grant Fund. It is a opportunity for Black college students interested in learning the art of sports broadcasting, specifically sports play-by-play, and also a growing network that young Black broadcasters can rely on as they are getting their careers started to make sure that we see and hear representation in the broadcast booth as well as we do among the ranks of coaches, players, and administration across sports as well.
Great
He
plug. I want
is,
to plug
sir.
Black Coaches United as well.
Absolutely.
We're a member of it, so we need all the young women and men that they want to learn and from some of the great coaches in our business, and we encourage you to join the BCU.
He's High Point men's basketball head coach Tubby Smith. Coach, I truly appreciate your time and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I'm glad we could do it. You did a great job. We appreciate being a part of it.
Thank you, Coach. And thank you, viewers, for tuning into Cultural Conversations with the Big South. We'll see you next time.